We had only just got to the point of defining what the historic environment is, which is my remit. And it's so wide. Legally, definitions are comprising the remains of any building, structure, work, cave, excavation, the remains of any vehicle, vessel, aircraft, or other movable structure or part thereof, anything, group of things that evidences previous human activity. So that's kind of everything. The National Planning Framework 4 says that the historic environment is the physical evidence for human activity that connects people with place, that links with the associations we can see, feel, and understand. And a historic environment asset, which is another term that's used in many formal documents, is a physical element of the historic environment, which can be a building, monument, site, place, area, or landscape identified as having cultural significance. All these assets are non-renewable and finite. So once they're gone, they're gone. Orkney's had 3 county archaeologists. Raymond was our first county archaeologist, and his appointment in February 1979 marked a major advance for archaeology in Orkney. His research for his PhD was undertaken by cycling to remote coastal stack sites in Orkney and Shetland and swimming to offshore rocks before climbing them to survey and record their remains. Funnily enough, that process has never been repeated. His ideas and breadth of knowledge of Orkney's sites has stood the test of time. He visited all the inhabited and a few of the uninhabited islands of Orkney. And he updated the 1946 inventory of the Royal Commission of Orkney. He established the Sites and Monuments Record for Orkney. Excuse me. And augmented the number of sites known by carrying out field investigations and post-storm surveys. On Westray, his surveys identified many important new sites, including Tukoi, and he was the large number of sites. The intensive program of rescue excavations that were carried out in Westray in the 80s was in large a result of his campaigning. In 97, Raymond left for Thurso, taking up a lecturing position at the North Highland College in the UHI, and I'm afraid he's no longer with us. So the baton was picked up by Julie Gibson, who not only worked in Raymond's team, but acted as the monuments warden for Orkney, and thus visiting most islands and all scheduled monuments, developing a deep knowledge of Orkney's past. The excavations at the Viking Cemetery in Westness in Rousey was the reason for her coming to Orkney in the first place. Julie was first employed by the Orkney Heritage Society and later the Orkney Archaeology Trust. And that was about the time the Heart of Neolithic Orkney was inscribed by UNESCO. She was instrumental in establishing the UHI Archaeology Institute in Orkney rather than anywhere else located within the UHI. And gradually various aspects of archaeology were established within the college, which has included working with developers, community archaeology, teaching and research. Support from the OIC and Highlands and Islands Enterprise has been at the very core of this. The role for Julie was always to look after Orkney's extraordinary archaeology, working for sustainable development and working towards the archaeology of Orkney being in as good a state after a generation as it was when she first encountered it. As she dryly stated, coastal erosion has somewhat undermined that ambition. Her first days in the job were to help with the Time Team film in Sanday, and then the Time Team special Mine How followed not long after. And since then, there's been discovery after discovery while Julie was in post. The Nessa Brog is obviously the most famous. Her most exciting find, I think she would say, would be the identification of the Scar boat grave in Sanday. She retired in late 2022, and then I was fortunate enough to be appointed. I first worked in Orkney in 1981 as a fledgling archaeology graduate on the Brock of Bursey. And this was followed by working with Anna Ritchie on the home of Patty, with Olioen in Tukoi, various small projects subcontracted by Historic Scotland, and through to Minehow before I actually moved here in 2005 to work for the Orkney Archaeology Trust Project Unit, and later Orca. And I came with experience of working from Neolithic remains to wartime heritage, from abbeys to castles, all kinds of things before I actually arrived here. A major part of the job essentially is to help develop or support projects that benefit Orkney and involve its various communities and contribute to what is the vibrant and thriving community that is Orkney. Part of the job is to work within the planning application system in the council to help developers avoid damaging Orkney's archaeology, which is often the cheaper way to go to avoid something. And whether it's by something as small as a house extension or as large as a wind farm. As a house extension recently, I just chatted to the architect, and we devised floating foundations instead of cut foundations, and that resolved the issue quite smartly. But I've got big boots to fill, essentially. The local authority archaeologists in Scotland, we band together in a group called the Association of Local Government Archaeology Officers. And there is a snapshot you can find online. But services are provided to 28 of the 32 local authorities in Scotland and the 2 national parks. In 2018 to 19, there were almost 22,000 planning applications monitored, almost 300,000 sites protected, managed, and promoted. At the time, there were 23 archaeologists in post, and now we're down to about 15 due to obvious constraints. But our work resulted across Scotland in just over 700 historic building surveys, 255 evaluations and excavations, almost 170 surveys and watching briefs. So you can see that the impact of archaeology in the planning and development and building and construction system isn't big, if that covers those numbers, cover the whole of Scotland. Only 5% of Scottish scheduled monuments, of designated archaeology, if you like, scheduled monuments, A-listed buildings, only 5% are managed by Historic Environment Scotland. The rest, the decisions which impact most of Scotland's historic environment, they fall under the remit of the local authorities and therefore under the planning system where this is appropriate. And so this is where our job comes in. Some teams have been cut due to financial constraints. Some larger authorities have still have teams separately working on HERs, listed buildings, and conservation areas. Most charge for their services. We do not. And currently, we don't have a listed building conservation area officer, a post that's used to attract finance, but at the moment that's held in dormancy. So some of that work isn't, we're not able, me and my colleagues in the development management, we're not able to pick up everything. But hopefully things will change in the future. Just looking at the time, I had a huge list of other things that I do, and I'm not going to tell you everything. But I deal with police on reporting human remains. I sit on steering groups like the North Wales Landscape Partnership Scheme. I monitor that people are doing their archaeological jobs properly. I have contributed to the Heart of Neolithic Orkney World Heritage Site Management Plan that's in its draft form and will be coming out for consultation next month, for public consultation. I also get involved in marine planning because Orkney has statutory planning powers over its waters out to 12 nautical miles. I work on the Scottish Islands framework for archaeology that is currently being drafted, which covers Orkney, Shetland, and the Western Isles. Um, I obviously there's TV and media and developing connections, trying to monitor coastal erosion, trying to field people reporting new sites, new discoveries. So you can see, along with the advice on the planning authorities and developer and talking to developers about planning proposals, hopefully early in their development, because that's easier to be more flexible in. Orkney Islands Council, as the local planning authority, has its own historic environment development controls, which come under the Orkney Local Development Plan. Now, this was adopted in 2017 and has come to the end of its life. It is still in place and it is still a consideration in planning. But the National Planning Framework 4, brought out by the Scottish Government last year, is the policy that takes precedence. But all these policies, they all play a key delivery in the support of protection and proportionate outcomes. Policy 7 in National Planning Framework 4 is pretty similar in many ways, although in simpler and shorter to our own policies, and we will be adopting several of those in the new policy that is being developed and over the next 2 to 3 years, which includes valuing, protecting and enhancing historic environment assets and places, and enabling positive change as a catalyst for regeneration to bring redundant or neglected historic buildings back into sustainable and productive use, to recognise the social, environmental and economic value of the historic environment, and to support the sustainable management of the historic environment. So there's protection and preservation in situ where possible. If not, then a full record how that happens, whether it's a standing building survey or an excavation or evaluations, if a less important site or asset must disappear. So excavation, recording, analysis, archiving, publication, and activities to provide public benefit may be the requirement rather than simple preservation and avoidance. That is for me to help advise our planning team on. They're called development management, by the way, but the rest of us know them as planning. So either way, you know who I'm talking about. I also have to make sure work that's done through planning controls are done to various standards and guidance. So the Chartered Institute for Archaeologists has a lot of standards and guidance for professional archaeologists. There's also an environmental impact assessment handbook for EIAs. There's managing change documents brought out by Historic Environment Scotland, for example, for managing effects on setting, for managing effects on World Heritage, all of which I have to be aware of and try and help people meet these standards. And people mostly do, because we mostly use professional archaeologists. In terms of our historic environment assets in Orkney, there are different levels of designated assets. So there are World Heritage Sites, scheduled monuments, A, B and C listed buildings, inventory gardens and designed landscapes, conservation areas, battlefields, historic marine protected areas, designated wrecks and protected military remains. We have in total of those categories over 1,000. We have 373 scheduled monuments, for example. No historic battlefields as yet. We have 629 listed buildings, 1 World Heritage Site, 6 conservation areas, no historic marine protected areas as yet, although there is parts of Scapa Flow are in the process of potentially being designated as such, small parts, which won't affect either the diving or the fishing industries, because there are remains that are already on the seabed, and nobody wants to wreck their fishing gear on on obstructions on the seabed, for example. But they do help the diving industry. Heritage diving is a great business, as you'll know, especially in Stromness. In terms of non-designated sites, we have almost 6,000 plus another 2,200 maritime sites. So in total, the National Record of the Historic Environment, which is an online database, has 9,150 entries for Orkney. In physical form, in the Orkney Historic Environment Record Office, also known as the Sites and Monuments Record, we have approximately 4,000 entries plus much more extra information that hasn't made it onto databases. In terms of the historic environment databases, I hope you're all aware of PassMap and Canmore. They are the online databases that run by Historic Environment Scotland, and they form the national record of the historic environment. One just gives you points, dots on a map. The other one gives you areas on a map. And they both need curating separately. They will show you all the different sites that we know of so far and that have been entered onto the database so far, which is very important thing to note, that not everything has yet been entered, which is again part of the advice I can give if I know of somewhere that hasn't yet made it being a dot on a map. It's always worth checking. And curating a historic environment record is a statutory requirement. And at the moment, Orkney curates its record online by having a memorandum of understanding with Historic Environment Scotland, who suck up the data that I give them and then produce the dots on the map. Many other local authorities have their own separate database, but that of course requires more people, more IT to make sure these they're secure and can be consulted. So at the moment, our public obligations to the public are through a memorandum of understanding. Another way of the data getting into the record is when archaeologists do work, whether it's a watching brief on a house extension, whether it's an environmental impact assessment or a research excavation, they input their job into a website called Oasis, which is again is a national database, and that is then I check through those. The record is created, a review is required, the data is checked again, the review is confirmed, and then it moves up the line and will eventually get onto the online databases. And it records the different types of events, whether they're geophysical surveys, whether they're excavations, or simple single find spots. So again, I have to try and keep on top of that to at least make sure that's getting into our database, even if I'm not doing so much actually on the physical maps and the site card entries that are in the Sites and Monuments room in the college, which currently is in the college. And it's essential we have this and try and keep this up to date, because it forms the basis for knowledge for the planning system, for the local development plan, for the baseline of knowing what we have in Orkney for researchers, oh, excuse me, everything else. So moving on from that kind of rather heavy kind of these are the statutory obligations, this is our planning policies, and these are the legal requirements we have. Another part of my job is in terms of media, or encouraging media to connect to the right people, because it's usually not me. It's I'm often in a supporting role rather than the person. But all these things are interlinked, because Orkney in general benefits from archaeological work, which continues to fascinate and draw the attention of people from all over the world. The sites and projects undertaken in 2024, just taking 24 as a snapshot, and most of this information kindly comes from Sigurd Towery. The sites and projects undertaken contributed to an increase in traditional media and other online activity focusing on Orkney's archaeology. And we've seen a steady number of site visitors eager to see archaeology in action, and community engagement and volunteer activities. This brings in millions to Orkney's economy. And media outputs, for example, include my trip to Auskerry, which was with Hamish Auskerry and Teresa Probert, which was a wonderful time I had. And Hamish put this onto YouTube, where it's had 35,000 views of me pontificating. Digging for Britain, which I hope you saw last week, included two of our sites, the Cairns and the tomb at Blomar. That had over 2 million viewing figures. Visitors to the UHI archaeology blog had over 50,000 visitors. There's Facebook, 10,000 followers, Instagram, 2,500 followers. Twitter had 5.5, but as they've now migrated to Blue Sky to replace Twitter, so the figures for that as yet are oncoming. Other outputs that keep Orkney in the public eye, and sometimes I get asked questions about things I don't know anything about. Because of that. For example, Colin Richards and Vicky Cummings' book on Stone Circles, a field guide, has been nominated for a Book of the Year in the 2025 Current Archaeology Awards. The Nessa Brogger website recorded its highest ever activity record with almost 400,000 page impressions. The Nest was named Research Project of the Year at the 2024 Current Archaeology Awards, and Nick Card was named Archaeologist of the Year at the same awards. And of course, we had Professor Dame Mary Beard come and open the exhibition at Tankernes House last summer about the Nessa Brogger, which saw over 60,000 visitors for the duration of the exhibition, as well as the new book, Nessa Brogger, Past, Present and Future. And the final season of film work was filmed by Time Team for a documentary to be broadcast this year at some point. The excavations at Swandrow in Rousey, that won Current Archaeology's Rescue Project of the Year in 2024. They've also had a huge number of views, and a program about them was recently posted on YouTube. A Time Team program was posted on the YouTube channel for Time Team. It was also mentioned in the Scottish Parliament by our MSP Liam MacArthur, and it also got an article in The Economist in 2024. So you can see the reach that our archaeology has and the payback that it brings back to Orkney. Blomere was on Digging for Britain, and publicity on that because it's all human remains, has been held back until more information is known. But it will certainly give us information on DNA, isotope, diet, gender, diseases, where people were born in Neolithic Orkney. It's a splendid site. I hope if it's on BBC iPlayer, if you don't know. I also deal with discoveries. For example, people report to me, or hopefully also to Siobhan at the museum if they find objects. But extraordinary different kinds of finds we have. For example, the rocket pole in Shappensea was identified in an escape coastal assessment project at Low Whitehall, and it served as the ship's mast during practice drills with a rocket apparatus by the Coast Guard. It had been described on modern ordnance survey maps as a lookout pole or an observation post, but it's one of only something like 3 rocket poles in position in the whole of Scotland. And when it was in use in the practice was you were pretending to fire a rocket to a ship in distress, which carried a thin line, and then that was used to set up a zip line and harness for a ship-to-shore rescue. And the rocket pole has now received some money from the NILPS project and has, because it was about to give away at the base, and has now been, thankfully, has been restored, and now is on the heritage trail around Whitehall in Shappensea. You might remember from last year that Ingrid Gillespie found only the 3rd Bronze Age socketed axe ever found in Orkney when she was bagging the brock. So you never know what you find. They Facebooked Nick, who let me know, and now it's in our museum. And it's something like the late Bronze Age date, so 1000 to 800 BCE. And there are less than 20 examples of Bronze Age metalwork found in Orkney in total, so it's an important find. Police report to me, or when they remember, they report to me going, "We have human remains. Are we near an archaeology site?" Or so we do have tourists, for example, walking along the coastline at Newark in Deerness, reporting human remains. The police get called out. They contact Dundee University going, "Are these human?" Dundee University goes, "Yes." And then they talk to me going like, "Is this an archaeology site?" And I go, "Yes, it is. Don't worry about it. And if you could hand it to the museum, that would be great." So there are bizarre things in life that happen like that. People also find things that I go and have a look, and I have no idea what it is. Usually something structural. I was confounded by some kind of gully in Sanday last year with John Chapman at 59 degrees north in his back garden, where he's trying to plant shrubbery, and he came across a flag-top drain. As to the age of the drain, no idea. And it was easier to cover it back up and not try and plant shrubbery on it than to investigate it further. So we know it's there, but that's as far as it went. Another example of the kind of work that I do is when people reported, and it's a great example of a team effort, is when people reported to me that wreckage had been, wooden wreckage was exposed on the Sands Araby in Sanday. And it's a spectacular looking piece of timber, an upturned hull. And it was like we were thinking about what do we do with it. I contacted Historic Environment Scotland to see if we get a little bit of money, and contacted Wessex Marine, who kindly took on the job with Ben, especially Ben Saunders, and that has been going on ever since. But it's really down to the Thorne family, Myra Stockton, Ruth Peace, the Sandy farmers of Raymond Brown, James Muir and Adam Towery, who brought a load of old tractors and trailers to the beach once it started breaking up, so that the specialists could dismantle it piece by piece and store it beside the Heritage Centre in Rousey in wet cloth. I don't think there was any spare curtain or duvet cover in the whole of Sanday after that, because people brought all kinds of things in to try and keep the timbers wet. And then Nick Hewitt from Museums in OIC, he managed to get the National Heritage Memorial Fund fund a large conservation grade tank to stabilize the timbers in, so that once we get the dendrochronology dating and research into the wreck back, which we haven't got yet, but the samples have now been taken, and we have something like getting on for 20 dendrochronology samples, so, and all of which are good samples. So we should hopefully know more about the date of that wreckage soon. There was a lot of presumption of what it might be, but we're kind of holding fire until we actually know what date it really is. We have people reporting things emerging in storm beaches, for example, that go, and at least I record the fact there's a site there, if it is a site. There was one reported by Ruth Peace in the storm beach on the east side of Bay of Sankoy in Sanday, only 500 or 600 meters south of the Muir burnt mound that was excavated on the storm beach about in 2014. So this storm beach seems to be covering quite a lot of interesting archaeology. At the moment, we've left it be because I don't know what state it's in at the moment with this current storm season, but there was not a lot we could do at that point. And had a fortuitous meeting with Joe Hambley of the Scape Trust at the Scottish Islands Conference in Kirkwall in 2023, when Rosalind Fisher from Stronsay was there too. We all had a chat, and that led to a coastal survey of most of the island with Stronsay folk, because it was especially important that the local knowledge of the Stronsay folk was incorporated into the survey, of what sites were, how far the coast had gone back, what people had done about it. So again, this kind of work is, I'm often not involved, but I might kick something off, or I might enable connections between people to be made, and then I can let people get on with it. We, of course, have a real problem in Orkney with coastal erosion, and trying to monitor it and keep on top of it is an impossible task. I just use Newark as an example, where there are human remains falling out all the time. Every storm season, there's a little bit more gone. The community has done wonders in sandbagging over the years and helped slow the rate of coastal erosion down. And I would like to see another season of sandbagging happen. I was a bit late for kicking anything off before this current storm season, so we'll have to wait and see. Links of Notland is a different kind of erosion problem, where it's wind erosion and mobile sands that are acting like liquids. So you might get a 19th century kelping pit being deflated, the sand underneath it blows away, and all of a sudden it lands onto a Bronze Age roundhouse. And how do you tell the difference sometimes? But HES and Graham and Hazel and Westray have been doing a magnificent job in trying to at least rescue and excavate the site. And at some point we might hope to stabilize the site, because it's a nationally important site. So we do have other kinds of erosion we have to contend with, not just straightforward wave action. That kind of, coastal work kind of brings me on to the 76 whales. I had unfortunately, Tresness, where they were found, essentially, where they washed up, was unfortunately, well, not unfortunately, but it's sandy isthmus, sandy neck of land, a headland, which has Bronze Age and Neolithic tombs on it. It has a broch on it, possibly more Bronze Age burial mounds on it that haven't been identified, because it seems in Sanday a lot of these headlands were used almost as landscapes of the dead. So we couldn't bury the whales where they were found, essentially, and they had to be buried because 76 of them rotting on the beach was a hazard to human health. So Haley headed this up But what I did, I stayed back at the ranch, and every time somebody from Sanday came up with a field going like, you could use this if you like. I then checked on our databases as to whether there's archaeology there. And eventually we got down to a couple of sites that were. We then had two archaeologists who live on the Sanday, Ruth Peace and John Dodd, with the JCB, went and did rapid testing to see if there was any archaeology in these that was unknown in these places, and they were successfully buried within, I think, about a day of the cetacean experts having taken their samples and autopsied. So, within 5 days, I think, of discovery, everything was sampled, buried. No archaeology was hit, but it was a great all-round team success story, I think. Another part of my job is helping visiting archaeologists. And possibly the most, well, I shouldn't say the most pleasurable one was last year when the old Broca Bursay excavation team, which was my first excavation here in 1981, they all came up for, well, as many as could, came up for a reunion. And we had a lovely week of reunion. We had a site tour by Chris Morris, the director of the excavation. And it was brilliant to have people's memories of that. I also try and do community outreach, which quite often I'm a bit busy. You could count this talk as one. I was invited to do a run through of the archaeology of Sanday, the Sanday Sulka last year, which went down very well, and then gave a guided tour of the eroding Neolithic to Viking site at Poole, where I think 50 people turned up to see me point a stick at a section of dirt, which was, I was very gratified, obviously. And then there are other print outputs. Julie, obviously, with her time, she produced the Rising Tides book, which was a bestseller for OAS. Orkney Wartime Heritage Map. She was involved in various international projects. So Destination Viking, the Viking sites around Orkney suddenly got notice boards. The Thing project in the Viking world. She kicked off Scotland's Island Research Framework for Archaeology, being located in the Northern Isles as opposed to in the Central Belt. And also produced academic publications, and I'm nowhere near that yet. So I would hope to be in the future, but I might retire before that. Who knows? But what would I like to see my job doing, or the way I need to go? I'd be interested to hear what future projects and suggestions people have. OIC has currently got LiDAR for the whole of Orkney, which would be good to see going out to researchers in archaeology. I'd like to see more coastal surveys and updates of the 1990s coastal surveys to see how much we've lost or not lost. It's 20 years ago more now. I'd like to see an audit of all of Orkney's wartime remains so we can give them ranking of value as to what we really need to save and what, if we can't do it, then would be easier to let go. I envision chasing up backlog sites to bring to publication, chasing people up, which would include myself. I would like to catch up with the backlogs for our historic environment record entries. And if I had time, I would like to kind of get grants for people's projects. I don't have to do it all. There are a huge amount of archaeologists here who can do it themselves, and I can just be involved in helping kicking things off. The main thing is that Orkney and its folk are the best assets that Orkney has for its heritage, for its historic environment, and it's important everybody gets involved in that. I shall draw to a close there. I have no idea how long I went on for. It was more than half an hour, I know.
Thank you very much for that, Paul. And I don't think you spoke for very much more than half an hour at all, and it certainly didn't seem to me like that. You know, this is coming after the event, but welcome everyone to our first talk of 2025. It used to be the case in the pre-digital days that the speaker's nightmare was that they had left their speaker's notes on the bus and that they are ad-libbing. I think Paul has shown us tonight a more updated version of that, where not only is he having to try and make the technology work, but he knows there are at least 74 people watching him with curiosity, trying to make the technology work. And although, Paul, we didn't get the technology to work, we were all deeply impressed by the calm and collected way that you coped with that. And then you went on and gave us that excellent talk. And it really was an excellent talk. Paul very generously acknowledged his predecessors and the history of the county archaeologist. He took us on a mouth-watering roll call of what's happening in archaeology today, with some interesting sidelines about whales and so on. And he sketched out for us his wish list or his strategy for what should come to the future. And he's made my job at this point easier because he's invited you to give your ideas of what we might be doing. And that's the stage that we'll move on to now, if you're happy to do so, Paul. I'll invite our attending audience to give us any questions or observations on what you've spoken about. I'm not sure if we've got the technology to go into the team chat, the group chat. If you can use the group chat, then put any questions you've got in that. And Paul, I'd invite you to have a look at that for answering it. Or otherwise, put up your hand and we'll take questions in the old-fashioned way. Either digitally put up your hand or give us a wave from your video screen. And we'll ask Paul to carry on what he's said now in the form of a conversation. But first of all, Paul, many thanks for the talk you've given us just now and for coping in such a lightsome way with the technical difficulties that we've had. But let's move on to the next stage and see if we have what questions we have for Paul, or indeed observations on what he's told us tonight. Can I kick things off, Paul, if I may? I know this is usurping my position as chair, but you know, you've spoken with the incredible richness of Orkney's archaeology, and you've sketched in for us very well the context in which that's taking place in a much wider way. There's been quite a lot of talk about the possibility of Orkney having a dedicated archaeological museum or somewhere that is a focus for Orkney's remarkable archaeology to be shown and brought together. Is that something that you, as county archaeologist, are engaged in, or would be involved in discussions of that sort?
I'm involved in discussions, but museums comes through. This kind of thing comes through the museum service, which is a different service to the one I'm in. But it is something that is being discussed at the moment, and we'll just have to wait and see. It's a kind of it's like a twinkle in people's eye, and as we know, funding nationally is very short. So we'll have to see if we can source funds, but that comes under a different service to me.
David,
Hayley,
I was going to say, David, I've got my hand up. So in the current list of things that are going wrong with the technology, I can add in that people don't seem to be able to post in the group chat, but they can direct message me. So folk are direct me. So I have got a few comments, but
oh, cool.
Should I go through those one by one? And just to say that I've kept this recording. Normally we turn off at questions, but I think if we keep it recording, then it gives us a general sense, and goodness knows what this recording is going to look like at the end of it. I hope I hope that Mark
Chaos.
Newton's very good with his edit button. So anyway, I'll go through the ones that I've had so far. So the first one was from Morag in Edinburgh, who says, "Please pass on my appreciation to Paul. It's a pity there's no Q&A enabled nor the group chat," which is how I realized that wasn't enabled. So thank you for that. Next, I've got a question. Well, it's not really a question, but it's more of a comment from Stephanie, who says, "Many thanks for the excellent talk, but I'm sure many of us are exhausted just hearing about your varied workload and areas of responsibility."
Yes,
Yeah,
that's
well
what I
done,
was looking for
Paul. We'll put that
sympathy.
in
I was looking for
the
a lot of sympathy.
Yeah. Um, Melody Jane says, "Thank you very much. You mentioned past map and something else I'm unclear of. I'm unclear of the spelling of Kendall, question mark.
Right.
So do you want
So it's
that again?
past map, all one word. If you Google it, you'll find it really easy. And the other one is Canmore. That's spelled Canmore. And again, if you just Google Canmore, you'll find it very easily.
Okay. So then Mike has put a question in, which is something dear to both yours and my hearts here, Paul, because it's about the 76 whales. And can I just say, as the person who was on Sandy trying to get the whales buried, Paul was absolutely brilliant. And also, I should put a shout out to our colleagues over in Nature Scott as well,
Mm.
because not only were we trying to find sites where we could bury 76 whales, we were also trying to avoid otters and little terns and all the other things. And the marvelous, if you're trying to find a site in Orkney that has no otters or no wildlife and no archaeology, all I can tell you is that's really, really hard. And Paul was absolutely brilliant in helping us through that, as were colleagues in Nature Scott. So the question is, okay, when you bury 76 whales, do you put something with them to identify the burial for future archaeologists? Maybe I can answer that a bit more, or you.
You answer that. Yeah.
Yeah, so I was involved. I was over in Sanday and dealing with this for the council in terms of the overall disposal of the 76 whales. And what we did, I don't think anything was actually put in the pits with them. I should say that the guidance that we had from SEPA was that we could have no more than, I think it was 7 or 8 whales per pit, because they were actually really very big, albeit pilot whales. So we had to have 10 pits in the end to put them all in. So you can see why that was a problem in terms of the archaeology. What we do have is a very good record of exactly where the pits are. So we do have that noted, and it's on the record at the council, but also on the record in other places as well. So at that point, and I don't know, I didn't go to the burials, because I will have to tell you, after 5 days, those whales were not particularly pleasant to be anywhere around, and in many cases, farmers and folk from Orkney Builders got involved, and they were having to scoop the whales up to pop them in there. So I don't know, but I would not be surprised if something was not put in with them, but certainly I can't say that anything officially was.
I'm not aware of anything, but he says, who knows?
Yeah, but they were very well recorded, so we
Yes, we
know where
have the
they were.
site precisely located.
And I also think maybe in a few years' time there'll be exceptionally fertile bits of land. We will know where they are from the 10 bits of very fertile land. Okay, next question is from David Lynn, and he says, "What bits of archaeology do you think deserves greater protection from what factors, and how with a magic wand would you achieve this?"
Oh, David, good question. There's a certain amount of the wartime stuff, I think, that is kind of undervalued, but that's why I would like to get an audit done so we can actually value in hierarchy. Because recently we discovered that was completely, I didn't know, was that we have a World War One wireless hut surviving that had been converted into a larger house in the 1920s. And it was like, oh, how are we going to record that? The other one I would like to see would be HMS Tern. I would like to see HMS Tern. At the moment, it's a collection of listed buildings. I think the area itself needs some kind of conservation order on it. And And obviously, the Berkeley Heritage Trust and the HMS Turner subgroup of that are doing their best to bring that forward. I think I mean, all our types of sites, whether it's Neolithic, I would like to see more Bronze Age. We're having a problem with even finding Bronze Age settlement at the moment. So that would be a nice thing to have. But our late medieval, early post-medieval sites are few and far between, and kind of not as valued because they're not as spectacular as, say, the Norse Viking sites. But the Lifter project, Looking In From the Edge project that I helped kick off, that has brought a lot of more information about that to the fore, and about our Orkney's changing trading networks and communications from being in the northern Arctic world into a more southern European, across the North Sea trading networks. I'll leave it there.
Yeah, that's super. Thank you. Next question is from Stephanie. Could Paul give us his views of what are the best ways for enthusiastic amateurs in Orkney to help support his work?
Money. No. When you see projects being advertised looking for volunteers, join in. Because sometimes because people have volunteer fatigue as well, that with the NILPS project, for example, we had the Tombs of the North Isles, and we also had the Industrial Heritage of the North Isles, both being run by Dan Lee for Tombs of the North Isles, and then Dan Lee and Sean Bell for the industrial archaeology of the North Isles. The industrial archaeology, for some reason, triggered a lot more people's interest, I think, because it wasn't the usual run-of-the-mill archaeology that we get really blasé about, which anywhere else would have people kind of running around in excited circles. So join in, learn. There are volunteer opportunities all the time on the research excavations, but there are also regular outreach and volunteer projects being put forward, especially through the Archaeology Institute.
Yeah, thanks, Paul. And I think just to add into that as well, that as an archaeology society, a lot of other archaeology societies in other parts of the country will kind of do a probably a bit more direct hands-on archaeology than we do. But one of the reasons why we don't is, of course, because we have the Archaeology Institute, we have all the projects and so on and so forth. But we are looking as an archaeology society to grow skills within our own volunteers, and that's a project for us probably over the next year or two. And I think in terms of doing that, there will be opportunities for us to maybe work on some projects with Paul and with UHI that kind of comes in from a slightly different direction as well. So I think watch this space, and we'll definitely be working very collaboratively on that.
And coming back on that, I would like to see Joe Hambley and the Scape Trust coming back and doing more training on recording coastal erosion and recognizing sites in their section in the coast. And actually recording what we have is because we have over 700 miles of coastline. And so it's impossible for me to keep on top of that. But in terms of almost like a citizen science project, that's what Scape are trying to do. And so I would be trying to encourage them to come back and do more training on different islands and different parts of Orkney. And that would be really helpful.
Yeah, and that kind of builds on what we as the Archaeology Society were able to do pre-COVID, where we had the graffiti recording project in St Magnus Cathedral, which was a partnership with UHI and also Fran Flett-Hollenrake, the then custodian at the cathedral. And again, we're looking to try and expand that a little bit going forward. So I think there are opportunities. It's about finding the time to do it. And as we already know, Paul has got a huge amount on his plate, and the Archaeology Society are all volunteers. So these two things need to come together, but I think that they will, because the will is there. That's the key thing. So more questions coming in. Colin says, is the rocket pole on Papa Westray known about near the North Hill?
Oh.
No, clearly not.
Clearly not. I shall write that down.
Great.
So yes, rocket pole near North Hill on Pappy. Okay. Yeah. It might be known by other people. It's just not known by me.
Okay.
So my ignorance doesn't mean that it's not a recorded site.
Yeah, no, no, absolutely. So, comment in from Colleen and a question. Thanks, Paul. Well preserved. Persevered, sorry. Persevered, and I think that's absolutely the case.
Thanks, Colleen.
But also very well preserved, obviously. Your job is clearly far too big for a single person. If funding was unlimited, what areas for your job could be passed over to a colleague in the role?
Well, as I've said before, and I know how you'll roll your eyes, listed buildings and conservation areas would be a really good start. And also somebody who's just dedicated to upkeeping the historic environment record for the SMR for Orkney and feeding the data into HES to the national record would really, really help. I think as two examples.
Yeah, and Paul is only teasing me because I work with Paul, and part of my job is trying to help Paul get these staff posts that he talks about, and I'm rolling my eyes because I know how hard it is. I do my best, Paul. You know that I do my
I
best.
know.
So then a question from Denise. Denise says, "Hi from Shetland. Really interesting talk from Paul. Thank you. Tourism and particular pressure from the sheer number of visitors we get in the Northern Isles is a hot topic. Does Paul have any thoughts on the impacts on Orkney's archaeology and how to mitigate adverse impacts?"
Well, there's a whole group of us working on that. The World Heritage Management Plan helps address that. The Orkney Islands Tourism Strategy tries to help address that. And the Orkney Heritage Gateway project, that's part of the Islands Deal funding, run by Inga and Raymer. We're all coming at this, trying to come at this issue, and most importantly, we have Christy as our tourism officer, who has been working on this for years and is excellent in what she does, and her knowledge about the subject, from how coach tours run to how cruise ship coaches, especially because they're so tightly timed, it's difficult to make them vary, for example. So there are plans to disperse visitor footfall, but if they're on a set coach tour, that's kind of not possible. So that applies to independent tourists instead. Toilets are a constant festering sore of an issue that we have at the moment. Just footfall erosion gives Historic Environment Scotland a real headache at the Ring of Brodgar, and they've done their best at putting down resistant matting, and they have to shut off different parts of the route around the site to let the vegetation recover. So there are great issues. There is, and that's on the archaeology. I mean, on society in general, sometimes the panoramic coach tours, for example, they have started going to some of the beautiful scenic spots that aren't archaeological, but are beautifully scenic, and that's where a lot of the local community goes to get away from all the tourists in the summer. So, so we do have a problem, and it's not a problem as such. It's an issue that it shouldn't be impossible to manage. It's about managing people. And if part of the management of people is about curtailing visitor numbers in some way, then so be it. But at the moment, that's not necessarily been an approach. Although this year, I think we're curtailing the numbers of cruise ship passengers allowed on shore and on a daily basis. Which I can't remember what the number is, Hayley. I don't know if you can. But that's the first attempt at trying to not be so over touristed that people never want to visit. The plus side, of course, is, and Shetland is just kicking off on its cruise ship experience, really. So I would say get your infrastructure in place, like toilet stops, especially. Because a lot of the people on those are kind of my age and have small bladders, and need to get off every time they hit the cold air off the coach. They need to go to the loo. But get your infrastructure in place would be the main thing, and see what you can charge. I mean, the plus side is we have a huge number of people employed who have jobs relating to the tourism industry, whether it's the extraordinary amount of qualified tour guides that we have, whether it's the extraordinary amount of high-end jewelry shops we have on the main street of a very small town, food and farming kind of benefit from that kind of thing. So it's a two-way street that we haven't yet succeeded in managing to everybody's satisfaction, I think.
Yeah, thanks, Paul. I think that's really interesting. And I think one of the things as well that's coming out of a lot of the work that we're looking at, and Paul's touched on this a little bit, is also about spreading out the offer of Orkney, if you want to use the sort of tourism language, to include other places. So in the last couple of years or so, I think there have been smaller cruises that have gone, say, to North Ronaldsay or to Pappy or to
Yeah.
Hoy. And I think there's an increase in offer of cruises going to Hoy to go and explore the wartime archaeology. So it doesn't have to just be the top sites. But I mean, I think, let's be honest, if any folk are coming to Orkney for the first time, then and they're interested in archaeology, they're almost certainly going to want to go to Skara Brae, Ringabrugga, and those kind of like key sites. And I think there's a lot of stuff there that has do really well around managing that. But but it is also quite difficult. And I think to folk who are on the call who've not been to Orkney before, I think a lot of us who are here would say, don't try and do it all in a day. And a lot of cruise visitors then do later on come back and spend longer in the county, which is really good and good to see. So the question, which is the last question I've got in the chat so far, from Nigel Jennings, who says, for Paul, if you had to give up the rich archaeological heritage of Orkney, which UK county would you choose to go to?
Oh, well, Edinburgh feels like home, so that would be Lothian, because I lived there for 20 years before I lived here. And if you're going to live in the city, it's a brilliant place to live. Or my home county is Lincolnshire, which kicked me off in archaeology because growing up we had Anglo-Saxon church towers that incorporated into the fabric of the masonry Roman soldiers' tombstones, Norman Castle, Norman and Gothic Cathedral, the only and it still has the only standing Roman arch in Britain that you can drive through still. So I'd probably choose my home county because I'm biased.
We didn't think we'll let you go anyway, so good luck with that. Just back in from Morag. What about better bus services for independent tourists like me, as well as to benefit Orcadians? I had to drive to visit the cairn site last summer because the bus service stopped short of the site. I would have happily walked the mile or so from the main road. I think that's a really fair comment, isn't it, Paul?
It is, yes. I suppose the people who do the bus services would need to have enough people doing that to make it financially viable, would be my comeback on that. And if it's not financially viable, then it won't happen.
I mean, I think one of the key things of that as well is about what's happening on down in South Ronaldsay and down that area, because we know that there is talks ongoing at the moment about the potential, and only the potential, but ideas. A lot of folk are looking at the Tomb of the Eagles to see whether or not that can be brought into community ownership. And obviously, if that is the case, then that would give another reason, as well as going down to the Hope and the Cairns and the like, to be down that side. And it's also very beautiful down that way as well. And
absolutely
amazing.
Yeah. I mean, I suspect one of the potentials would be potential ways of managing that would be to just say on these certain dates there will be a small, not a full-on bus, but a small coach or a minibus will go down to these sites, and you'd have to organise your time to fit in with that and see how that worked, rather than a daily bus service or anything.
That's it for questions that have come through. So I don't know, David, if you want to pick it up at that. I've got a short announcement on the next meeting, unless Colleen wants to pick that up, but I've got Colleen's notes.
Okay. Thank you for that, Hayley. Paul, again, thanks to yourself for your presentation tonight. I noted a couple of the questions were of a personal, if you had a wish list, what would you do, or where would you work if you had the choice? And that seems to me to indicate that there's a personal engagement with what you've said tonight, and I think that's always heartening when our speakers can do that. And perhaps for all of us, it's very good to get the type of overview you've given us tonight, Paul, because we have excellent talks drilling into the specifics in a very forensic way of exciting archaeological developments on a one-by-one basis. But we don't often have the opportunity of having, if you want, the riches of Orkney laid out in front of us in the way that you have done. And also, I suppose, as a bycatch of that, you've outlined the very human issues, economic, social, local, that face people who live in communities where the archaeology is a treasure trove. And that is very interesting for those of us who live in Orkney, and it gives an insight for those people who either have never been to Orkney in our audience tonight, or who hope to come to Orkney, or who perhaps are regular visitors. And so for all these things, Paul, thank you very much for what you've given us tonight. We will attempt, if we can, to put your screen show, your screen presentation, alongside the talk that you've given. Very much for your presentation tonight.
Well, thank you for asking me. Sorry, it didn't quite work out, but there we go.